A pleasure to meet all at last. And well, if you can't already tell by the somewhat subtle grin that I have right now, that's because I actually just got done watching what I feel like is probably one of the most underrated Christmas-related comedies of all time. In the late 80s, it was commonplace to have a good amount of movies around. More importantly, for 1988, it was quite eventful in the film industry. I've talked about Rain Man before, and I feel like that there's a few other films I could talk about as well, but Scrooged is a Christmas movie unlike many others. It's the classic tale of A Christmas Carol in which the Ebenezer Scrooge character is instead a guy known as Frank Cross, played by the one and only Bill Murray, the master of pessimism and sarcasm himself, who was not only famous for playing Peter Venkman in Ghostbusters, but would also go on to play Garfield. Yeah, way to connect two different franchises together like puzzle pieces. Anyways though, before all that, he of course had Frank Cross on the line. This was a guy who liked to do all sorts of crazy stuff in the film industry. Make commercials, make TV shows, and in the opening sequence of things, there's a crazy series of atomic explosions and violence and warfare that goes on. And basically, board members that Cross is in charge of are shocked at what they see. One guy in particular that actually is pretty close to Cross, almost in a way of friendship. It's important to note that we do have a lot worth talking about here. But what happens is that Cross ends up firing everybody because many of them aren't really fans of what he's been doing, nor are real lovers of his work. But, of course, Cross is the guy that hangs out in his own office and in his own set of alcoholism because he has a lot of drinks going on, and even has himself his own secretary, Grace Cooley. Now, Grace has a family, but you wouldn't believe, Cross only decides to give her a towel of all things. And he does the same thing with a few other workers as well. Yeah, a towel based on his company, even with an embroidered logo on it, that's the best he can do. Although he also gives away a VCR as a Christmas gift. But what we get here is the fact that this is very different from Ebenezer Scrooge. So I can understand the idea of A Christmas Carol going in a different direction with this, not only modernizing it and having one of the most amazing actors of the 1980s, but the real big excitement starts to show up when we start to get into the more Scrooge-related storyboard that this film intends on doing here. You know, the three ghosts that intend on visiting Frank Cross. He had first skits a visit from his old boss, whom is now a walking corpse and looked pretty decrepit in a horrible way. But when the two meet each other, Cross does believe he's hallucinating, probably from the drinks he's having, but it starts to get very real very quickly because his boss basically holds him out the window and his decrepit arm breaks off suddenly at the elbow, causing Cross to fall to the street, but then he's somehow back in his own office. It's essentially like some kind of warning that he was being sent to. Not only for the fact that there were three ghosts who intend on visiting him and reminding him of who he is, rather than who he's now become, a guy whom is now egotistical and oblivious enough to believe that he can do stuff on his own, and be minimal and kind of a jerk to other people in the process. But I feel like that the real big moral message starts to come around when we see ourselves the first ghost of the three, the Ghost of Christmas Past. Now, the Ghost of Christmas Past, as we probably know, is female, but in this instance, it's male. And he's played by David Johansen. The Ghost of Christmas Past takes on the form of a taxi driver from New York, as he does have that kind of accent in him. And what he intends on doing is giving Cross a taxi drive back to his own home in 1955. So I guess they were trying to spoof Back to the Future in a way. I mean, why else bring him to 1955 when they could have just brought him to any other year in history? But it's the past that truly is brought upon us. So anyways, though, 1955 for Frank Cross was that he was watching TV and he wanted himself a toy train for Christmas. But all his father brings him is a few pounds of veal probably from a butcher shop because it's in a sack. And, well, here's the thing about it. Mr. Cross himself, he just tells him that he has to get himself a job and buy the toy train himself. Yeah, quite a way to go. Don't you know it's a little too early to be having a kid go looking for a job? I mean, sure, there's Paperboy and stuff like that, but Cross didn't seem all that old enough to be able to work on that stuff, much less ride a bicycle or even know how to handle newspapers by any means. But once the visit comes and goes, and Cross does remember his mother being pretty supportive of him, despite being a heavy smoker, and his father being kind of a jerk, he does start to realize the morals that he's been going through here. All in all, there actually is someone else that I should bring up here, because apart from all the characters that I brought up here, and I could talk a bit more about the Cooley family, because apart from Grace, there's many other people there. A young boy named Nicholas Phillips, Calvin Cooley. Yeah, and so keep that in mind, because Nicholas Phillips' character, Gavin Cooley, will be pretty important later. Calvin doesn't really know how to speak at the moment, but we'll see why he's important later on in the film. Anyways, though, once he gets back to the current time by any means, there does come a point later on where he is essentially brought into a lunch with his current boss. Because while all this stuff takes place, and Lou Hayward is essentially proud of what Frank Cross has been doing over the years, being pretty supportive of him, we do eventually get to see some more crazy stuff happens. I mean, Cross believes that a guy's on fire and tries to put it out only to realize that he just soaked a waiter. Seriously. And he just walks out of the restaurant like nothing even happened. Oh, but the real tragedy behind all this good stuff is that we do have ourselves Karen Allen's character, Claire Phillips, come around and essentially remind Frank Cross of whom he once was and the fact that they once shared a relationship. Well, the thing is that there eventually comes a point in which that Cross is brought back to a time where he and Claire once had a thing for each other, and they even had a few Christmas gifts that they opened early, one of which was a book about Kama Sutra, which, as we know, is an ancient sexual art in which that correlates to the idea of performing like animals. Basically, by making animal sounds, it's a spiritual connection that allows people to draw closer to each other and eventually get freaky. But let's just say that that ideology is a whole different topic for another video. But in any case, though, the thing between Frank and Claire is that Claire herself has actually been running a shelter for the homeless and has actually been trying her very hardest in order to keep things in line here. Oh, but here's the real beauty about it. Because the Ghost of Christmas Present, I kid you not, is probably one of the most hilarious things ever. Because first of all, she's played by Carol Kane, a great actress by any means, and certainly has one hell of a voice. Because this ghost allows for Frank Cross to see many people that he's known as well. Not just Claire, but a lot of relatives and friends that he's known over the years. They're all gathered up in one particular room, opening up some gifts that Frank had sent them, including the VCR and a towel, as if any towels were necessary at all, but apparently one of them had to go to the ones he was drawn closest to most of all. So they, of course, were a little disappointed about all this stuff here. And more importantly is the fact that Frank Cross is missing out on a Trivial Pursuit challenge. No joke. They're all playing Trivial Pursuit, and Carol Kane is bashing Frank's head in. I don't know why that is. It's just hilarious to watch it, first of all. And I would think this was probably like slapstick, before slapstick was even cool. I mean, if you're from the 90s, like me, then you know that randomly getting slapped in the face or getting punched in the gut or anything like that, that's the kind of slapstick that's really stuck with people over the years. I mean, I could probably take a big beating like that if it'll make people laugh again. Anyways, though, once more beatdowns happen, Frank Cross is essentially brought back to his own place again. The messages really start to come together just as well, because we also do get to see a point in which that Frank has been participating in a show in which that he's dressed up like a dog. And it's basically a kid's show that's supposedly there to benefit. But Claire does show up on set at one point. Frank takes off the costume and starts to talk to Claire, telling her that he won't be available for certain things. And it's easy to see why she unfortunately had to leave him for some time. He, of course, was agreeing to that, and up until the very point that he called her on the phone in his office just a few nights ago, that was apparently the point in which that another chance was brought on for Frank and Claire to reconnect and hopefully reestablish their relationship. So, while this was inexplicable by Frank's standards, it was basically the wake-up call that he needed. Not only because of his old boss showing up as a walking corpse and dropping Frank himself on the streets, but the fact that these ghosts of Christmas were showing up, especially the past and the present. Oh, but don't even get me started on the ghost of Christmas future, because that is just as crazy. Well, guess what, though? There is a ghost of Christmas future that shows up on set, and Cross gets hysterical about it. I mean, he thinks it's the real deal, which is kind of foreshadowing, I will say. But it does eventually happen, because guess what? One of his former viewers had come around armed with a shotgun. No joke. This guy is so brazen and crazed up, most likely because of his homelessness, that he thinks that he could take down his former boss with a shotgun. Oh, but it gets even crazier from there, because apparently after dodging all those shot blasts, he ends up in an elevator. Frank, of course, ends up going toe-to-toe with the one and only ghost of Christmas future. An elevator ride sends him up to a certain floor of the unknown, in which that he sees himself in his own casket, getting burned alive. Apparently, there was a mistake that happened. They thought he was dead, but he was unable to tell them because he was about to be put inside a cremation chamber. But Frank snaps out of it, and soon enough, he and this assailant of his, they both eventually work things out. He shows love to him, he be kissing him. Like I said, there's all sorts of crazy silliness going on around here, but this is Bill Murray, for crying out loud. Why wouldn't he do this sort of stuff on set? Well, after reconciling with each other and thankfully getting rid of the shotgun blasts before they get worse, Frank Cross decides to make a message for everybody on the set, and having all the cameras and all the crew members come in line so that he can broadcast a very special message for everybody out there. He talks about all the people he's known, all the people he's loved, and all the things that have happened to him up until this point, especially the ghosts that he has been visited by. All the life lessons that he has known, and even answering that Trivial Pursuit question, which shocks a lot of people, actually. Especially the ones who have been playing the game when the Ghost of Christmas Present came around and showed Frank Cross what was happening there. I mean, this was a turning point that he needed. He was essentially becoming the full-on Ebenezer Scrooge, and most of all, he was hoping to reunite with his long-lost love life with Claire, which of course is what happened. So the man whom became the Scrooge of 1988, he got everything he wanted, but only because he learned a few valuable lessons. The past showed him that his mom and dad were not so great. The present showed him he had plenty of people to work with. And for the future, it showed him that if certain things were to keep going, he would likely end up in a casket. Just the same way as it was shown to him by that very ghost of the future. And in the end, everybody was quite happy with what Frank Cross has now been doing. He not only turned over a new leaf, but he is sure to do a lot more for the company and for everybody out there who knows and loves him very much. So, that's Scrooged for you. An impressive film for 1988 and probably one of the best. I can't say it's anyways better than Rain Man, but it sure does bring about a lot of laughs in so many ways. You got the physical comedy, including all the stuff that the Ghost of Christmas Present does to him. You got all the sexual innuendos, like Frank Ross wanting to see someone's nipples on set. And of course you have, get this, Calvin Cooley coming up, which he states the famous line, "God bless us, everyone." This, of course, brings about the ending to a unique Ebenezer Scrooge-style Christmas movie. A Christmas Carol unlike any other Christmas Carol films that had come around. And there were a lot of them. So, for that reason, I'm happy to give Scrooged an 8.9 out of 10.1. It's not a perfect film, I will be honest with people, but it sure does rank up rather high with many other Christmas movies out there. Even Watch Mojo made a top 10 best Christmas films video, and Scrooged was number 8 according to them. But all in all, Scrooge does amazing for a film starring Bill Murray, and I feel like not much more can be said about that. So I'll be back tomorrow with one more Christmas film, but there's going to be a bit of a spooky twist to it, so that's a good subliminal hint out there for those who want to take a guess as what it is. But until then, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.